Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Shadows of Japan, where we explore the eerie and mysterious tales that lurk in the land of the rising sun. I'm your host, John Smith, and tonight, we have a chilling story that will make you question the very nature of reality and the shadows that surround us. Our tale begins in a bustling hospital in the heart of Tokyo. Here, we meet Emily Tanaka, a dedicated nurse with a unique heritage. Emily, a third-generation Japanese American, has always felt a deep connection to her ancestral homeland. Little did she know that this connection would soon draw her into a world beyond her wildest imagination. Now, before we delve into Emily's extraordinary experience, let me ask you this: have you ever noticed something strange about your shadow? Perhaps it moved when you didn't, or seemed darker than it should be? In Japan, shadows have long been associated with the supernatural, and tonight's story might just make you look at your own shadow in a whole new light. It was a night like any other at the hospital. The clock had just struck midnight, and an eerie silence had fallen over the corridors. The fluorescent lights cast a cold, harsh glow, creating shadows that seemed to dance and flicker with a life of their own. Emily was on her usual night shift, tending to patients in the intensive care unit on the 5th floor. As she sat at the nurse's station, catching up on paperwork, a strange feeling crept over her. It was an indescribable sensation, a feeling that something was off. At first, she tried to shake it off, attributing it to fatigue from the long hours. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling only grew stronger. Then, she heard it, a faint sound coming from the far end of the corridor. Rising from her chair, Emily cautiously made her way towards the source of the noise. As she walked, the fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker and dim, casting long, undulating shadows on the walls. What Emily saw next defied all logic and reason. The shadows on the wall were moving, writhing like living creatures, completely independent of any light source. They expanded and contracted, as if something on the other side of the wall was trying to push through. Emily rubbed her eyes in disbelief. Was this a hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But no matter how many times she blinked, the shadows continued their eerie dance. And then, dear viewers, something even more incredible happened. From the room at the end of the corridor, a black mist began to seep out, slowly, taking on a human-like form. Despite her fear, Emily's sense of duty as a nurse compelled her to investigate. As she approached the room, her heart pounding in her chest, the mist grew thicker, more substantial. It was clearly not human, yet it moved with an undeniable purpose. With trembling hands, Emily reached for the door handle. Slowly, she pushed the door open, and what she saw inside would change her life forever. The room was in complete disarray. The patient's bed was empty, the sheets twisted and tangled as if there had been a struggle. And there, in the corner of the room, stood a figure entirely composed of shadows. As Emily stood frozen in shock, the figure turned towards her. Where a face should have been, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to draw on all light. Suddenly, all the shadows in the room began to move at once. They writhed and twisted, flowing towards the shadowy figure. Like streams of dark water, Emily felt her own shadow being pulled away from her feet, drawn inexorably towards the entity. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as she felt she might be consumed by the darkness, footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Emily, are you all right?" came the voice of a fellow nurse. As Emily turned towards the sound, the otherworldly scene in the room vanished. The patient was back in bed, sleeping peacefully, and the shadows had returned to their normal state. but Emily noticed that her own shadow seemed thinner, somehow. She tried to explain what she had seen to her colleague, but the words wouldn't come. How could she describe something so utterly beyond the realm of normal experience? In the end, she convinced herself it must have been a hallucination brought on by fatigue and stress. But, dear viewers, this was only the beginning. From that night on, strange occurrences began to plague the hospital. Patients reported their shadows growing fainter, moving independently, or disappearing altogether. The medical staff was baffled, unable to explain these phenomena through any known medical or scientific means. As confusion and fear spread among the hospital staff, Emily made a fateful decision. She was determined to uncover the truth behind these bizarre events. She suspected that what she had witnessed that night was somehow connected to the inexplicable cases that were now piling up. Little did Emily know that her decision would lead her down a path that would challenge everything she thought she knew about reality, and ultimately change the course of her life, and perhaps the fate of two worlds. Now, you might be wondering, dear viewers, what could possibly explain these bizarre occurrences? What dark forces were at work in this seemingly ordinary Tokyo hospital? To understand that, we need to delve deeper into the shadowy realm that exists just beyond our perception. In Japanese folklore, shadows have long been associated with the supernatural. There are tales of shadow people, or keijona and keijotoko, shadow women and men who appear in the dark corners of old houses or abandoned buildings. These entities are said to be neither fully alive nor dead, existing in a state between our world and the next. But what if these folk tales held a kernel of truth? What if there really was another world, a world of shadows, existing parallel to our own? As Emily continued her investigation, she began to experience more strange phenomena. She found herself able to see things that others couldn't. Flickering shadows in empty rooms, dark shapes, moving at the edge of her vision. At first, she feared she was losing her mind, but soon, she realized that she had been given a gift, or perhaps a curse. Emily discovered that she could communicate with the shadows. They whispered to her in a language that she somehow understood, telling her of a world beyond our own, a world made entirely of shadows. But this shadow world was not meant to interact with ours. The boundary between the two realms had always been solid, impenetrable. Until now, something, or someone, was trying to break through. And the consequences could be catastrophic for both worlds. As Emily delved deeper into this mystery, she encountered others who shared her ability. There was Drive, Kazuo Nakamura, an elderly Japanese physician, who claimed to be a messenger from the shadow world, and Alex Morrison, the very first patient to exhibit the strange shadow symptoms, who had now become something other. Together, they uncovered a chilling truth. A being known only as Dr. Shadow was attempting to merge the shadow world with our own. This enigmatic figure believed that by fusing the two realms, humanity would evolve into a higher form of existence. But the shadows themselves were resistant to this plan. They warned Emily and her allies that such a merger would result in the destruction of both worlds. As the situation escalated, the effects began to spread beyond the hospital. All across Tokyo, people reported strange occurrences with their shadows. Some disappeared entirely, while others grew so dark and substantial that they seemed to have a life of their own. The city was plunged into chaos. The government tried to cover up the incidents, attributing them to mass hysteria or some unknown virus. But the truth could not be contained for long. Emily and her companions raced against time to stop Dr. Shadow's plan. They delved into ancient texts, consulted with shadow beings, and pushed the boundaries of science, in their desperate quest to prevent the merging of the two worlds. But dear viewers, the path to saving both worlds would demand great sacrifice. Emily found herself caught between two realities. Her very existence split between the world of light and the world of shadows. In a climactic confrontation atop Tokyo's tallest skyscraper, Emily faced Dr. Shadow. The fate of both worlds hung in the balance, as reality itself began to unravel around them. With a supreme effort of will, Emily used her unique connection to both worlds to absorb the chaotic energies that threatened to tear reality apart. In doing so, she sacrificed her own corporeal form, becoming a being of pure shadow and light. The crisis was averted, but at a terrible cost. Emily Tanaka, as she had been, ceased to exist. In her place was a new entity, a bridge between two worlds, tasked with maintaining the delicate balance between light and shadow. In the aftermath of these events, most people's memories of the shadow incidents faded away, like a half-remembered dream. The world returned to normal, or so it seemed. But for those who know where to look, the signs are still there. Shadows that are a little too dark, a little too sharp, flickering movements seen from the corner of one's eye, and sometimes, in mirrors or reflective surfaces, a glimpse of a world beyond our own. As for Emily, or the being that was once Emily, she continues her vigil, moving between our world and the shadow realm. She works tirelessly to maintain the balance and prevent any future incursions. And so, dear viewers, the next time you see your shadow stretching out before you, remember Emily's tale. Remember that there may be more to that dark silhouette than meets the eye. For in the world of shadows, nothing is ever quite as it seems. Before we end tonight's episode, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder. If you were in Emily's position, would you have the courage to sacrifice everything to save two worlds? Or would you be tempted by the power offered by someone like Dr. Shadow? Remember, the choices we make in the face of the unknown define who we are. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are those who walk in the shadows, unseen and unremembered by the world they've saved. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of Japan. Until next time, keep an eye on your shadow, and sleep tight. Good night, and pleasant dreams, if you can have them. End of part 1. Now, dear viewers, let's delve deeper into the aftermath of Emily's transformation and the ongoing battle to maintain the balance between our world and the shadow realm. In the weeks following the climactic event atop Tokyo's tallest skyscraper, the city slowly began to return to normal. The strange occurrences with shadows gradually subsided, and people's memories of the incidents began to fade like morning mist under the rising sun. But for Emily, or rather, the being that Emily had become, there was no return to normalcy. She found herself existing in a state of flux, caught between two worlds. In our reality, she appeared as a faint, shimmering presence, barely visible to most. In the shadow world, she was a being of pure energy, able to move and interact freely. Emily's new existence came with both incredible power and heart-wrenching isolation. She could traverse both worlds at will, observing the intricate dance of light and shadow that few could perceive. But she was cut off from her former life, her friends and family unable to truly see or interact with her. Kazuo Nakamura, one of the few who retained his memories of the shadow incidents, became Emily's sole confidant in the human world. Together, they worked to understand the nature of Emily's new existence, and the ongoing threats to the balance between worlds. One day, as Emily was moving through the shadow realm, she made a startling discovery. The shadow world was not simply a dark reflection of our own, but a vast, complex universe with its own laws and inhabitants. These shadow beings were not malevolent entities, as human folklore often portrayed them, but complex creatures with their own society and culture. Emily learned that the shadow beings had long been aware of our world, observing us through the shadows we cast. They had their own legends about the world of light, just as we had myths about the realm of shadows. But this delicate coexistence was under threat. Dr. Shadow, though defeated, had left behind followers, who sought to continue his work. These shadow cultists believed that merging the two worlds would create a utopia, blind to the catastrophic consequences such an action would bring. Emily found herself thrust into the role of guardian, patrolling the boundaries between worlds and thwarting the cultists' attempts to breach the divide. It was a lonely, thankless task, but one she embraced with determination. As months passed, Emily began to notice subtle changes in both worlds. In our reality, people seemed more attuned to their shadows, unconsciously, avoiding stepping on them or casting them on others. In the shadow realm, the beings there began to show more interest in the world of light, their curiosity piqued by Emily's presence. One particularly memorable incident occurred at the very hospital where Emily's journey began. A young patient, a girl named Yuki, was admitted with a rare condition that caused her to cast no shadow at all. The doctors were baffled, unable to explain or treat her condition. Emily, sensing something amiss, investigated. She discovered that Yuki's shadow had become trapped in the shadow realm, unable to return to our world. Using her unique abilities, Emily journeyed into the deepest recesses of the shadow world to find and rescue Yuki's lost shadow. The journey was perilous, filled with encounters with hostile shadow entities and treacherous landscapes that defied the laws of physics. But Emily persevered, driven by her compassion and her duty as a guardian of both worlds. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity in the timeless shadow realm, Emily found Yuki's shadow. It was weak and fading, but with gentle coaxing, Emily was able to guide it back to our world. The moment Yuki's shadow was reunited with her body, the girl's health began to improve dramatically. The doctors called it a miracle, unable to explain the sudden recovery. But Emily knew the truth, and it reinforced her commitment to her role as a bridge between worlds. This incident, however, raised troubling questions. Why had Yuki's shadow become trapped in the first place? Was it a natural occurrence, or was something actively trying to separate people from their shadows? Emily's investigations led her to uncover a disturbing trend. All across Tokyo, there were increasing reports of people experiencing temporary shadow loss. Most cases resolved themselves quickly, with the shadows returning after a few hours or days. But some, like Yuki, were not so fortunate. Working with Drive Nakamura, Emily began to map out these incidents. They discovered a pattern. The shadow losses were concentrated around certain locations in the city: old temples, abandoned buildings, and places with a history of ghost sightings were particular hotspots. One such hotspot was an ancient shrine, deep in a forest on the outskirts of Tokyo. Local legend spoke of it as a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where one could sometimes catch glimpses of the spirit realm. Emily decided to investigate the shrine. As she approached, she felt the boundary between worlds fluctuating, rippling like water. Disturbed by a thrown stone, the shadows here were darker, more substantial, seeming to reach out towards her. At the heart of the shrine, Emily made a shocking discovery. Hidden beneath the main altar was an ancient artifact, a mirror that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As Emily gazed into its depths, she saw not her own reflection, but a vast, shadowy landscape, a direct window into the shadow realm. This mirror, Emily realized, was one of several anchors that helped maintain the separation between worlds. But it had been damaged, its power weakened over centuries of neglect. This explained the increased shadow activity in the area. As Emily contemplated how to repair the mirror, she sensed a presence behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with a being she had hoped never to encounter again, Dr. Shadow. He had survived their previous encounter, though he was much changed. His form flickered between human and shadow, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. "You see now, Emily," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "The barriers between worlds are failing. What I sought to do deliberately is happening on its own. The merger is inevitable." Emily stood her ground. "No," she replied firmly. "What's happening is not a merger, but a breakdown. If we don't restore the balance, both worlds will be destroyed." Dr. Shadow laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to darken the very air around them. "Destruction? No, my dear. This is evolution. Humanity has lived in ignorance of the shadow realm for too long. It's time for a new age of enlightenment." With these words, Dr. Shadow lunged for the mirror. Emily, realizing his intent to shatter it completely and irreparably damage the barrier between worlds, threw herself in his path. What followed was a battle unlike any other, a clash between light and shadow that bent the very fabric of reality around them. Emily, drawing on her connection to both worlds, fought with every ounce of her being to stop Dr. Shadow. The shrine trembled, shadows writhed along the walls, and flashes of otherworldly light burst from the combatants. It was a spectacle that would have driven any normal human mad, a glimpse into the chaos that would ensue if the worlds truly merged. In the end, it was Emily's unwavering determination that won out. With a final, desperate effort, she forced Dr. Shadow back, away from the mirror. Then, channeling all her power, she began to repair the damaged artifact. As the mirror's power was restored, reality seemed to stabilize around them. Dr. Shadow, weakened and defeated, faded away into the shadows, but not before leaving Emily with a chilling warning. "This isn't over, Emily," he hissed, his voice fading like mist in sunlight. "The worlds are meant to be one. You can't fight the tide of evolution forever." With those words, he vanished, leaving Emily alone in the now quiet shrine. The repaired mirror hummed with power, its surface now reflecting the world around it normally. The immediate crisis had been averted, but Emily knew that Dr. Shadow's words held a grain of truth. The balance between worlds was becoming increasingly fragile. In the days that followed, Emily worked tirelessly to locate and repair other weakened anchor points around Tokyo. Each one presented its own unique challenges, from shadow creatures guarding the sites to the logistical problems of accessing abandoned buildings or restricted areas. During this time, Emily began to notice changes in herself as well. Her ability to move between the worlds was becoming more fluid, more natural. She found she could maintain a more solid presence in the human world for longer periods, allowing her to interact more easily with Drive, Nakamura and others who were aware of her unique condition. But with this increased control came a price. Emily found herself growing more detached from human concerns, viewing the world through the dual lenses of light and shadow. She had to consciously remind herself of her human past, of the emotions and connections that had once defined her life. One particularly poignant moment came when she encountered her family. To them, she had been missing for months, presumed dead. Emily watched from the shadows as they visited her memorial at the hospital, leaving flowers and sharing memories of her. She longed to reach out to them, to let them know she was still here, still watching over them. But she knew that to do so would be cruel. They could never truly understand what she had become, and trying to maintain a relationship with them would only cause more pain. As Emily turned away from this bittersweet scene, she noticed something that chilled her to her core. Her family's shadows were acting strangely, stretching towards her, as if sensing her presence. For a moment, she feared that her proximity was causing them to lose their shadows, just as had happened to Yuki and others. But then she realized something even more disturbing. The shadows weren't being pulled away from her family members. They were reaching out independently, as if trying to communicate with her. This development added a new layer of complexity to Emily's mission. Were all shadows sentient to some degree? Had they always been, and humans had simply never noticed? Or was this a new development, a consequence of the weakening barriers between worlds? Emily shared her observations with Drive Nakamura, who was both fascinated and concerned by the implications. They began a series of experiments, carefully observing the behavior of shadows in various situations. What they discovered was astonishing. Shadows did indeed seem to possess a degree of independence, especially in areas where the barrier between worlds was weaker. They would react to Emily's presence, sometimes even seeming to convey simple messages through their movements. This discovery led Emily to a startling conclusion. The shadow world wasn't simply a dark mirror of our own. It was a realm of potential, of unformed thoughts and half-realized dreams. The shadows were conduits between the two worlds, carrying whispers of possibility back and forth. Armed with this new understanding, Emily began to see her role in a new light. She wasn't just a guardian maintaining the separation between worlds. She was a translator, an interpreter, helping two fundamentally different realms understand each other. But this realization brought with it new challenges. If shadows were indeed sentient to some degree, what were the ethical implications of her work? Was maintaining the separation between worlds the right thing to do, or was she preventing a natural evolution of both realms? As Emily grappled with these philosophical questions, the practical problems continued to mount. The incidents of shadow loss were becoming more frequent and more severe. People were beginning to notice that something was wrong, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. Reports of ghost sightings and other paranormal activities skyrocketed. Emily knew that many of these were actually glimpses of the shadow world, bleeding through into our reality. The boundary between worlds was growing thinner by the day. In her journeys through the shadow realm, Emily began to encounter more sophisticated shadow beings. These entities were not simply reflections of human shadows, but complex creatures with their own society and culture. Some were friendly, curious about the world of light that Emily represented. Others were hostile, seeing her as an invader in their realm. One shadow being, in particular, became a valuable ally to Emily. It called itself Umbra and seemed to be a kind of scholar, or historian among its people. Umbra shared with Emily the shadow world's version of history, a perspective that turned many of her assumptions upside down. According to Umbra, the two worlds had once been one, long ago, in the mists of time, but a great cataclysm had split reality in two, creating the world of light and the world of shadows. This separation, Umbra claimed, was unnatural, and had caused untold suffering in both realms. This information forced Emily to reconsider her entire mission. Was Dr. Shadow right after all? Was the merging of the worlds inevitable and perhaps even desirable? Or would such a merger truly lead to the destruction of both realities? As Emily pondered these heavy questions, events in the human world were coming to a head. The increased paranormal activity had not gone unnoticed by the authorities. Government agencies from around the world were beginning to investigate, bringing with them the threat of exposure and potentially disastrous interventions. Emily knew she had to act fast to prevent a catastrophe. But what was the right course of action? Should she work to strengthen the barriers between worlds, potentially trapping shadow beings on their side forever? Or should she work towards a controlled merger, trying to guide both worlds towards a harmonious coexistence? The weight of two worlds rested on her shoulders, and Emily felt the pressure keenly. She had come so far from that night in the hospital, when she first glimpsed the shadow world. Now, she stood at a crossroads, her decision poised to shape the future of two entire realms. As she stood on the roof of the hospital, where her journey began, looking out over the twinkling lights of Tokyo, Emily made her decision. She would not choose isolation or merger, but communication. She would work to create controlled points of contact between the worlds, allowing for exchange and understanding, while maintaining the overall separation that kept both realms stable. It would be a difficult path, fraught with danger and opposition from both sides, but Emily was no longer the frightened nurse she had once been. She was a bridge between worlds, a guardian of balance, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Emily smiled. In that play of light and shadow, she saw the future, a future of harmony, understanding, and endless possibility. And so, dear viewers, we come to the end of our tale, but not the end of Emily's journey. Her story continues, unfolding in the shadows that surround us every day. The next time you see your shadow stretch out before you, remember Emily's tale. Remember that there may be more to that dark silhouette than meets the eye. For in the world of shadows, nothing is ever quite as it seems, and the greatest adventures often begin in the darkest of places. Before we part ways, I leave you with this thought. What shadows lurk in your life? What unseen forces shape your reality? And if you were given the power to bridge two worlds, what would you do with it? Remember, dear viewers, that the line between light and shadow, reality and dream, is often thinner than we realize. Stay curious, stay open to the mysteries that surround us, but also stay vigilant, for in the dance of light and shadow, we find the true richness of existence. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of Japan. Until next time, keep an eye on your shadow, and sleep tight. Good night, and pleasant dreams, if you can have them.